Hello and welcome to the IBMS pod. This month we catch up with Specialist Scientific Lead and Health Education England Ambassador Azuma Kalu and discuss mental health and workplace pressures. If you enjoy the discussion, be sure to check out his feature in the September issue of the Biomedical Scientist magazine. In Lab Life, our special guest host, Dr. Martin Khechara, is joined by student Steven Schnabel for a conversation about learning and education in the pandemic. But first up, as always, the news.
The IBMS is launching an exciting new website. Working with our website partner Pixelate, the new IBMS site will deliver a wide range of resources, training, and events for members. Members will be able to log their training and maintain records online using a new CPD system, whilst also connecting to a new e-learning platform.
IBMS President-elect Deborah Padgett recently presented alongside other prominent speakers at a parliamentary committee focusing on healthcare innovation, which was hosted by the think tank Policy Connect. Representing the IBMS, Deborah acknowledged that technology and clinical innovation are vital in driving earlier diagnosis.
Congratulations to all recipients of the 2022 Jen Johnson Bursary. The Jen Johnson Bursary was created in 2017 to honor former IBMS Council member Jen Johnson and provide successful applicants with a grant of up to £1,000 to attend IBMS Congress.
Whether you're a qualified biomedical scientist, a student, a university lecturer, or research scientist, we'd like you to present your project as a poster at Congress 2022. The application deadline has now been extended until the 15th of October 2021. You can find out more about all of our stories on our website. This month, we're joined by Azuma Kalu, who is a Specialist Scientific Lead in Clinical Chemistry at Sheffield Teaching Hospital's NHS Foundation Trust and is currently studying for a PhD in cancer genomics. Last year, he wrote an article in the Biomedical Scientist magazine looking at how the pandemic has increased workplace pressure and impacted well-being in the lab. A year on, he's back and he's written a new article on the topic, this time focusing on how to adjust back to normal post-COVID. Hi, Zuma. How are you doing?
Thanks so much, Jordan and Rob, for inviting me. I'm doing great. And how are you?
Very good, thanks. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
You've just moved to a new role in Sheffield from Great Ormond Street, and you're working in clinical chemistry. So could we start by just you telling us a little bit more about that role and, what you do in the lab right now?
Right. So I've been employed as the Specialist Scientific Lead of Specialized Clinical Chemistry of Sheffield Teaching Hospital's NHS Foundation Trust. We are one of the biggest foundation trusts in the country, and the laboratory medicine at Sheffield Teaching Hospital is actually one of the biggest, and it's ably run by two interim directorate managers in the person of Richard Waddle and Dr. Whitaker. So I was recruited into this role, and the people that played, significant roles in bringing me to Sheffield, were Richard, Dean Aziman, and Stephanie Martins. And I'm sure they identified, the unique role I could play in moving the service forward. And, I was asked to come and join, the team. And I must say it's been wonderful. I have been introduced to the very senior management team. And I would say I was actually given a sort of celebrity treatment on the first meeting, which was very. It was. I have to say, I was very impressed. Coming from, working in London and the Southeast for about 15 years, and coming up north, and I've been received with open arms. And Sheffield Laboratory Medicine, I have to say, it's one of the best. It's wonderful. The leadership. It's motivational, and they've got everything right. And I'm very happy that I'm here.
And in clinical chemistry itself, what kind of tests are you running day to day? What are the most common procedures going on in the lab?
Right. So I am the specialist lead scientist in specialized clinical chemistry. And so I manage 3 labs so to say. So we've got the toxicology lab, which is big. So we do coronial services, we do all the postmortem and sometimes do antemortem samples, for mortuaries, for pathologists. So we test, to find out, cases of drug overdose. We also are involved in sort of prison testing for drugs for abuse. We run, therapeutic drug monitoring, and we provide, a lot of services around drug testing. And we also have got, the special chromatography that is, do a lot of esoteric testing. And also we've got the trace elements. So it's a very big lab. And so I am responsible for, leading, the sort of the scientific side, of the work. And it's been wonderful. And I'm enjoying every minute of it.
And as well as all of that, you've actually started a PhD recently looking at the role of epigenetic effectors and non-coding RNAs in potentially treating prostate cancer. So how did this come about?
So about 5 years ago, I was just thinking through, asking myself, the question as a scientist, what contributions have I really made, to the scientific community? Because I've got to justify all the trainings I've had, both academic and sort of professional training. And I was looking at areas where I could advance knowledge, because research is all about advancing knowledge and breaking new grounds. And I asked myself, all right, so what are the common killers? When it comes to cancer, what are the common killers? And especially with men, because I think a lot of times, we tend to forget, some of these cancers, the effect it has on men. And then it occurred to me, that the number one killer, cancer killer was actually lung cancer, followed by the prostate cancer. And that's in men. And going by the 2018, statistics, there were actually 21% of the cancer deaths, were actually due to lung cancer. And then 13% were due to prostate cancer, and then 10% due to bowel cancer. And I started, to do some research, to look at where, an area where I could sort of make more impact in terms of advancing, research. And so I started discussing, with my current, project, supervisor, Dr. Francesco Correa of the Open University. And he put me in touch with a distinguished scientist of the Vancouver prostate cancer, who's also a professor of urology, a gentleman called Dr. Yujo Wang. He's a distinguished scientist. He knows a lot about prostate cancer. So we started working on a topic. And so that's how, the topic came about. So I am being supervised by a team of 4 experienced, researchers in the person of Dr. Francesco Correa of the Open University. So I've got Dr. John Goldings and, I'm Ombudsman, as well as Professor Yujo Wang. So it's been fascinating studying about, what prostate cancer is doing to men, and, how we can contribute as scientists in advancing the knowledge.
Yeah, sounds great. So what are you actually aiming to do with your project then? Could you tell us a little bit more about these long non-coding RNAs which drive cancer dormancy?
All right. So I think I'll start first of all by, trying to explain what long non-coding RNAs are before I go into the cancer dormancy. So, what happened is, so prior to 2000, a lot of scientists and researchers had the view about molecular biology. We said that, the template for inheritance, which is the DNA, so this DNA, which, you find in every, in the cell of, say, the human, this DNA have got to be transcribed, to a format that allows for them to be translated into proteins. So you've got the transcription of this DNA into RNA. and then the translation of this RNA into proteins. Okay. Now, so this very simple understanding, sort of allowed scientists to do a lot of research about proteins. Okay. And, there was this view that every cancer, okay, was connected to protein. However, after the human genome was decoded after 2001, when, the first template was published, it became clear to a lot of scientists and researchers that out of the entire human genome, that not even up to 2% of that genome was transcribed into protein.
Right.
So the question was, what is happening to the remaining 98% plus? All right. So at first, a lot of scientists thought, they were just sort of, junk, molecules. But latterly, due to advancement in research, we've been able to find that a lot of these are non-coding RNAs. And out of that population of non-coding RNAs, about 55% are of the class of long non-coding RNAs. So these long non-coding RNAs are RNAs that have about more than 200 nucleotides in their sequences, okay, and they've been found to play a number of roles, in the body. So their functions are just enormous, and every research in the area is discovering, something new, and which is actually what's getting a lot of us excited. So, what's the role in dormancy? First of all, I have to sort of try and explain what dormancy is. So, what happens in a solid, cancer, cancer, when I mean solid cancer, something like prostate cancer, uterine cancer, not like the liquid cancers like blood cancers. So in the solid cancer, what happens is, you have two sort of courses of treatment, mainly. So you've got the chemotherapy, so drug treatment, now you've got the surgical removal. So these are sort of the, two options, that, some of the options that are usually considered.
Yeah.
So what happens is, so after this, the patient has been taken through this course of treatment, and they have been certified, to be cancer clear, through maybe scans, through their clinical presentation. They are normally discharged, from the treatment. However, for some of them, after months and years, sometimes even several years, the cancer resurfaces. And it comes with so much force that in many cases, it kills the patient. So the question is, what happens between this period after this patient has been discharged from the treatment to when the cancer, reactivates? So that period is what we term as cancer dormancy.
Okay.
Now, our research has actually shown that right from even before the diagnosis of the primary, tumor, that some of the cancer cells, escape from the primary site. So what cancer cells do is that, when cancer begins to develop, so it creates an environment around the cell that is very acidic. And that acidic environment, produces a lot of, chemical called lactate. So it sort of acidifies the environment. And due to this acidification, the tension of the concentration of oxygen at the cell level, becomes very low. Now, our cells need oxygen to survive. So what happens is the body has to react in a way to make oxygen available at the tissue level, at the cell level. All right. So there is a process called angiogenesis. So it is the growing of vessels, of blood vessels. So the body begins to grow blood vessels towards the cancer cell area. So when these vessels grow towards the cancer cell area, now its aim primarily is to supply oxygen. However, because these vessels have grown towards the cancer cell area, a lot of the cancer cells now follow through the vessels and escape from the primary site and then move to distant parts of the body. So they move to other tissues of the body, a process which you call metastasis. All right. So they go to all these tissues and some of them hide. So they hibernate. So the question we're asking is, how are they able to hibernate? How are they able to, hide immune system? Principally, so my research, is trying to find a way to enable us, dictate, the presence of cancer even during that period of dormancy. And we want to do this. We want to do this by trying to identify, certain biomarkers. What we call biomarkers are biological agents. So these agents allow us to dictate, to say, yes, something is there or not. So I'll give you an example. Say in pregnancy, if a woman is pregnant, we'll tell them, right, you get a urine sample. And when they get the urine sample, so we test it. And then we're able to tell if they're pregnant or not. Now, that's because in the urine is is something that's called it's a hormone that's called the HCG. So that hormone is able to tell us, whether the woman is pregnant or not. All right. So we want to apply the same principle, to be able to pick up, these biomarkers either in blood or urine, so that when this person who's been declared cancer-free and has been taken off treatment, we're able to monitor their blood or urine, and then we pick up the levels, of those biomarkers. If they're high, we can tell, they still do have residual, cancer potential in them.
So at the end of this, you're hoping to develop some form of test to detect the biomarkers in the patient's blood, essentially. And that will tell you if the cancer is likely to come back or not.
Absolutely. So it's what we call translational research. So how are you able to move, the experiments, the testings that you do in the lab, and then you're able to move it to become, useful in patient, monitoring, management, and, clinical care. So that's what translational research is all about. So
excellent.
That's what I'm doing. Yes.
Well, that sounds brilliant. Thanks for going through that in such detail.
Thank you.
So I'll hand you over to Rob now. He's got some questions on well-being in the workplace for you.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed, Azuma. Hello.
Hi, Rob.
We first met over email back in, I think it was July 2020, when you emailed me a feature about managing pressure in the workplace. Now, you're doing a PhD. You've got a very busy working life. What made you decide to, off your own back, because I didn't contact you initially, you got in touch with me. What made you decide to do it, Azuma? You've got a lot on your plate already.
That's correct. But like I've always said, as scientists, we should always ask ourselves, the question, what difference can we make, through our work, through sharing of ideas, to improve lives, to improve the working environment. And this actually comes from my own experience, from, working in the NHS. It's not been easy. And I've tried to flip my experience, to be able to help other people, by sharing through writing, through providing safe space for people to be able to feel that, they can come into the lab and work, in a safe environment. And so that motivated me to, start writing, to share ideas of what I consider as, good practice, when it comes to, because at the end of the day, I think we overemphasize, physical health and underemphasize, mental well-being. And that is principally because, we are giving consideration to what we see. So I've decided, in my own little way, to begin to highlight some of these issues which are bothering people. As you know, we all are different. So we have a lot of problems, based on our upbringing, based on our family circumstances. We come into work, and the last thing we want is for you, to be put under pressure, and whatever we can do to sort of improve, the working life, of people, in the lab, that will be a little contribution, in improving, our working environment. So that's the primary reason why I thought, well, I've got to start sharing these ideas.
And do you think these issues around mental health and workplace pressures, are they specific to labs, or are they specific to the NHS, or across entire the kind of working population? Do you feel like in contemporary society everyone is having their own version of this kind of set of problems depending on their industry?
That's very true. So it's universal. It's something that occurs in every walks of life. And, but the only difference is that in every setting, it's slightly different, the way it presents itself, depending on the sort of work that is done in that particular work setting. So, but principally, the presentations are the same, because if somebody has, mental health issues, as a result of pressure at work, whether they work in the lab or they work in a supermarket or they work in an engineering company, the presentations are the same. So we just have to do what we can in our little, spaces to provide a safe working environment, for people. So as a biomedical scientist, I feel my role is to sort of, talk about what I know, using my experience and scale. So that's why I've sort of, been talking about, the issues as it relates, to healthcare scientists.
And in your journey through the NHS, have things improved over recent years? Kind of, we hear a lot about mental health and well-being in newspapers. Has there been any tangible change, or are we at the same kind of point we were 10 years ago?
I would say there's been a lot of improvement, and that's really due to awareness, because a lot of people have been speaking up and many people have been sharing their experiences as well. And the legislation, especially from the government and institutions, with the NHS, I think there's been a lot of awareness, and also, the obligation, from managers, to make sure that, we staff are provided with the information. And there's also support, whether it's occupational health or counseling services. The information is there, but it's all about access. Because at the end of the day, a new worker that comes into a workplace might not know that if they're having a particular issues, that they could access help, through a particular channel. So it is therefore the responsibility of the managers, the supervisors in the different workplaces to make sure that, their staff are provided with all this information.
And we had a pretty overstretched, under pressure workforce anyway. Then a pandemic comes along. How have things changed over the last kind of 18 months, Azuma?
It's been very difficult, to say the least, because I know a lot of my colleagues, including myself, we've had to work under extreme pressure. At the start of the pandemic, as you know, many workplaces had to put in contingency measures, to try to make sure that there was sort of continuity of services. And because of the requirements for staff that were vulnerable or deemed vulnerable to, self-isolate, it meant that many laboratories were sort of, depreciated in terms of staff numbers. And so there was heightened, pressure that was placed on the staff that were available to, keep the service running. So it's been very difficult. And in some labs that, you've had a lot of self-isolations, it was just left for very few numbers of staff to, keep, the service going, especially the ones that do out of our service. So you had, in labs that, one or two staff were covering all the out of our service. So it's not been, it's been very stressful, for a lot of, healthcare scientists.
And 1 year on from your first article on this, Azuma, you've written another article for the Biomedical Scientist, which should be landing on doorsteps in the September issue. And one of the things that I'd like you to flesh out a bit more for me was that there was a fascinating insight in there where you talked about how there's been kind of inequality has been exacerbated a bit by the fact that the senior management are the people who are able to work from home. They can work remotely, whereas the more junior staff, by the very nature of their job, have to go into the workplace every day. Can you talk a bit how that has kind of affected mental health and maybe even morale in the workplace as well?
Yeah, thanks so much, Rob, for raising that issue. The thing is, in a lot of the meetings that I've attended, whether it's a management meeting or supervisory level meeting or the senior management meeting, a lot of discussions are usually about, getting people to work from home. And not a lot of considerations have been given to the people that are actually able to work from home. And like everything, the ones that end up benefiting are the ones that sit at the table, at the high table, and, make all the decisions. And in this case, it's usually the senior managers. So you have in some labs, where the senior managers, had to work from home, due to their vulnerability or, any other, or maybe they just felt right. There were three of them in the office, and the office could only, hold two people. And so a senior manager decides to work from home, or a senior scientist decides, right, that they could do their reporting of results from home. And so they decide to work from home. Now, in all this, you realize that, the ones that have benefited are actually the ones that are highly placed, while the medical laboratory assistants, the associate practitioners, the junior healthcare scientists who do most of the work, have been required to come in, daily to do the work. Now, while the senior managers, as I've, sort of noted in my article, have been able to save on their transport allowance. Just say, for example, someone that works in London, and so they spend on the average £400 or 300, £400, every month on transportation. So you've got this amount of money coming back to you, and you live in the same area with a medical laboratory assistant who is required to come into work every day. All right, still spending that amount of money. Surely there is some sort of unfairness in it. And I've not heard anybody, say or challenge it or say something, about it. I think, from what I've heard, people have, talked to me about it. I feel that, using my platform, to sort of start the discussion. The question is, right, what can we do to support these low-level staff, these junior staff who've had to put in day and night shift, to keep the service going? They've all been required, a lot of them to drive into work, every day, every single, weekday, sometimes on weekends, to keep the service going. Whether they were night shifts, they've been required to come into work. And, whether it's, going via train or the buses. So they've been exposed, to higher risks than the senior managers that have been at home, through this period. So surely something needs to be, done to sort of help the junior staff begin to have a feel that, oh, somebody's actually, sort of, thinking about them. I'm yet to see that happen. And if this will sort of start the discussion, that'll be wonderful.
That seems like the perfect note for me to hand you over to Jordan, Azuma. There's some great points there, and now I'm going to hand you over with a quick fire round. Jordan.
Yep. Yes. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks,
yes. Thanks. So, yes, we've got some sentences for you to finish
All right.
in the quick fire round. So this should be related to your work. So nothing too tough. I mean, yeah. So the first sentence is, my favorite piece of lab equipment is...
Oh, that'll be the pipette.
The pipette. Why?
Yeah, because so if you get it right, because I work in, clinical chemistry. So if you get it right, with your measurement, it means that it goes a long way in sort of making sure that, the rest of the results are correct, because you've got to take, the right amount of volume, to be able to perform your assay. So if you get it wrong, then it means that, your end result is going to be wrong. So that's where I'll go with the pipette.
The trusty old pipette.
Yes.
And okay, so my favorite type of RNA is?
That'll be the non-coding RNA, because that's where my research is on.
So given the choice of working from home or working from the office, my preferred pattern of work would be?
I would like to work from the office, and that is because I strongly believe that for us to, be able to train, the future workforce, we've got to be physically there. I'm sure a lot of people might disagree with me, but as a scientist, there are some positions that you can work from home. That is very true. But as a scientist, if you want to be able to train the future workforce, you've got to be there to actually guide them, to hold their hands, to be able to show them, how to do it properly. So I would always, prefer to work from the office.
My favorite thing about living in Sheffield is?
Oh, the people are lovely. I mean, I'm working for a great team, Richard Waddle, Dean Tasman, I've got lovely people all around me. It's just been brilliant. And I'm loving every minute of it.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Azuma.
Yeah, thanks, Azuma. Pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks so much, Rob. Thanks, Jordan.
Bye.
Cheers, take care. Bye.
Hello, welcome to this episode of Lab Life for the IBMS podcast. I am Dr. Martin Khechara from the University of Wolverhampton, and I'm going to be your guest host for this episode. Now, students all over the country are going to be returning back to university come the end of September. And of course, many of them are going to be coming back from learning within the pandemic and having experiences in the pandemic to studies, of course, in biomedical science. And students have still been practicing and studying all the way through the pandemic panic. So what we thought, it'd be really good for us to talk to a student to find out about what they've been up to and their experiences. And I'm here with one of our fantastic students from the Department of Biomedical Science and Physiology at the University of Wolverhampton, called Steven Schnabel. How are you doing, Steven? How's things?
Keeping busy.
Excellent. Busy's good. Absolutely. Okay, so just to kick off, why don't you tell us what you're all about, what you've been doing, and all about yourself?
Hello, so I'm Stephen. I'm a third-year biomedical scientist student at the University of Wolverhampton. I'm technically going to be going into my final year because I've just come off a placement at New Cross Hospital studying clinical chemistry. But I do have a whole host of experiences, both pre-COVID, post-COVID, both within the lab, some internal stuff with the uni, some external stuff. I've been abroad. I've done some private lab experiences. I've worked in the NHS. So a rounded experience as a whole within the lab, really.
Now, you mentioned there you've been on placement and you suggested that you've even been abroad. Why didn't you tell us about what these placements that you've been on?
And I actually went out to Prague for a 2-month internship. And then, I actually was fortunate that I got to do a actual proper placement. So my course is normally just a 3-year course, so the BSc Biomedical Science. But if you get a chance to do a sandwich placement between second and third year, it becomes a BSc Applied Biomedical Science. Sure. So I was fortunate enough to get a placement to do my IBMS Certificate of Competency, which basically means that the institute can say that I have the knowledge to practice as a biomedical scientist within a hospital.
Sure.
So I basically completed that this year. So that's through the pandemic.
What was it like being a placement student in an NHS Trust lab through the pandemic?
The placement were great from the get-go. I had a training plan. They taught me through everything. I had a training officer. The uni were helpful. So I was in constant contact with everyone. And to be honest, I could almost say that I felt like there wasn't even a pandemic. The only difference generally I feel like being on placement was that I had to wear a mask all day. I felt in a better position by being on placement because I was in contact with a lot of the students who were at the university.
Sure.
actually doing the courses with our group. And they were like, we've got this to do and this to do, but we can't go in because there's no lectures, or we can't go in because it's recorded and I'm struggling. And then I'm thinking, I'm quite lucky here because I'm basically getting a final year practical that's just a year long. So I was going into work every day. So in actual fact, my life was kind of pretty normal. I was getting up, I was going to work, I was coming back. And that was my routine. In actual fact, I think in a funny sort of way, the placement students, they haven't been affected by the pandemic. I mean, a couple of comments from the hospital were made that actually under normal circumstances, we would have had a lot more face-to-face and explaining a bit more about the principles. Whereas with like social distancing, reduced numbers in labs, and because there were so many students, there wasn't that opportunity this year. So, I mean, I've made the most out of it, and I think I've had the best placement possible. Others might say that they wish to had a bit more contact.
I know through your work with the university, you've been quite involved in actually promoting biomedical science, haven't you? Just want to tell us a little bit about the sort of public engagement work you've been doing to promote the disciplines.
I'm a student ambassador at the university, so I help out on open days. I do a few different things. I've helped out do a lot of different lab sessions. So when primary schools or high schools come in for STEM engagement in the main labs at the university, I either show them about, give them a lab tour, talk about my experiences. I've also helped do the STEM engagement shops. So we're in the Wolfruna Centre and we set up a stall, and I was there promoting biomedical science and helping out here, there and everywhere. I recently, during lockdown, did a Zoom call for a couple of the different high schools, basically talking about my experience. I helped at the Big Bang at the NEC as well.
Some of your colleagues, for instance, on our pathways here at Wolverhampton, haven't had those opportunities. So how do you think the pandemic has affected those other people studying?
Regardless of just biomedical science, being a student throughout the pandemic has been hard. Obviously, for those working at home, they obviously always took it home, but I was in student accommodation. So at least I had a hall of 6.
Yes.
So at least I was with somebody, whereas some other students were just in their house with their family. They didn't really have any friends from their course other than physically seeing them. It's impacted everybody slightly differently. I think everybody has then taken it in their own stride to react differently. People have made the pandemic how they want to make it. People have argued and gone, this is really unfair. People have just gone, you know what? It's happened. What can we do? Let's just get on with it and make the most out of it.
We've had a lot of bad, but there's got to have been some good. In just a few words, what's been your most positive experience during the pandemic?
I think my most positive experience during the pandemic is actually that I've been able to do a placement, because the hospital could well in their right have just gone, we're not taking any students this year, too rushed off their feet. It's just going to be the staff in there. And then I would be doing my final year. And then hopefully I would have completed my degree. And then I would be looking for potentially a job to do my certificate. So having the opportunity to actually do a placement in the first place and be privileged enough to actually have a reason to be able to leave the house to go and work, because I was doing important work, I think that's just been the best thing.
So just to finish off today, let's finish with a classic. All right. And so if you could give just one piece of advice to a student that was going to be studying biomedical science, it might be somebody thinking about moving into studying biomedical science and so on, what was the one piece of advice that you could give them?
Oh, interesting one. I think the thing is with biomedical science, if you're going to go into it, if you have an idea that you might like a particular discipline, for example, like you really like microbiology or you really like something else, if you go into, say, for a degree that's just in that subject, you're sort of limited to that particular subject. Whereas with biomedical sciences, you suddenly have this freedom to decide where you want to go. So I personally would recommend, if you want to go into a particular science, a particular subject, go with biomedical science, because you'll have a baseline knowledge across all the courses. You'll have access to all the resources. And then actually, you might decide that, actually, no, immunology isn't for me. Or no, hematology is more for me. I quite like the idea of blood. Or no, actually, microbes is more for me. So my advice is, if you want a career in science, start with the basics, build from there. If you want a career in the lab, start with biomedical science, start from the basics, build from there. Main thing I would say is do your research. Science is very, very wide. Yes. You can go from anything from plants to space. It's very, very, it generally is, biology is very, it's wide. So my advice generally is do your research. If you want something with science, go biomed, because you learn everything, then you learn all your disciplines, and then you can decide what you want to do.
Yeah.
Because then with biomed, you've got that biomed degree. Say you go into chemistry like I've done, and you spend a year there and you go, actually, I'm not really into chemistry. I think I might go somewhere else. That degree kind of sets you up. So you have that ability to be flexible. You can decide where you want to go. You're not set in stone. So that's my advice.
All right, then, Stephen, it's been absolutely fantastic to speak to you today. Thank you for taking the time to chat to us for the Lab Life section of the IBMS podcast. And good luck for the coming year.
You.
And I'll see you in the lecture theatre, hopefully sometime soon.
See you in the lecture theatre. See you soon.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the episode. These podcasts are released monthly at the same time the magazine comes out. So whenever a new issue lands on your doormat, head back online to listen to a new episode. And don't forget that these podcasts can be used for your CPD. Take care and bye.